Hello, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So here I'm in Hughenden Manor, which was the home of Benjamin Disraeli, sometime Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He was later raised to the peerage as the Earl of Beaconsfield. So Disraeli, he was born in London on Midwinter's Day 1804 into a Sephardic Jewish family. His paternal grandparents had emigrated from Italy and made a considerable fortune. His father, Isaac Disraeli, was a notable littérateur, philologer, and so on, and really just a man of letters. Was able to live as a gentleman of leisure. So Benjamin Disraeli was born at Theobald's Road in London. It was then considered the county of Middlesex where he lived, not actually London itself.
Sorry?
I was speaking to my camera. See, I got these fans already. Anyway, so he went to a school that was not particularly notable, Benjamin. He was rather miffed that his two younger brothers got to go to Winchester College, but he didn't. And he thought that he wasn't sent there because of his decidedly Semitic appearance. He'd been very bullied. When he was 12, they converted to Christianity, and they decided to convert to the most advantageous form thereof. That's Anglicanism, because those who were not Anglicans were legally discriminated against at the time. So he was close to his elder sister, but not so close to his two younger brothers. Anyway, Disraeli, when he was 16, he was an articled clerk in a solicitor's firm, as in going to work his way towards being a solicitor. When he went for a long holiday on the continent, he became disillusioned with being a solicitor and thought it was tedious, it was unsuitable for a man of his romantic inclinations. So he eventually became, they thought about becoming a barrister, but no, he'd be a man of letters as well. But that didn't work out. So someone's looking at me. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to film, but they haven't said that we're not allowed to film. So what else about here? Anyway, so Disraeli, he became quite wealthy. When he was 35, he married a woman 12 years older than himself, this affluent widow. She was too old to have children, but he was fond of his nephews and nieces. So he flirted with radicalism. He eventually became a Tory, and he was, despite that, somewhat sympathetic to Chartism. Shan't give you a potted biography, tell you every twist and turn of his very checkered political career. But he savaged appeal for the repeal of the Corn Laws, which endeared him to the Conservative backwoodsman. Even though he's very much a Londoner, he wanted to be the country squire, so he bought Hughenden Manor here in Buckinghamshire. A sort of small stately home was close to Lord Carrington, who was Lord Lieutenant of Buckinghamshire. Lord Carrington's family had been tailors in Nottingham, had arisen in politics at the time of Pitt the Younger, and some people said that Lord Carrington's family was not grand enough to be raised to the peerage. So there's Beaconsfield as a town near here. That's why Disraeli got that title, the Earl of Beaconsfield. So anyway, you can see it's absolutely luxuriously furnished, and you see all these busts, all these portraits of 19th century figures, some of them his political allies and some relatives. Anyway, he published a number of novels, Coningsbury, Tancred, Sybil, and so on, and he's famous for coining the expression two nations. One of his characters says, there are two nations who are different from each other in manners, habits, modes of life, as the inhabitants of two different planets. The other character says, what are these two nations? He says, why, the rich and the poor. So the expression one nation Tory has come from that, as in someone feels they must unite the rich and the poor, and that the wealthiest must have concern for the needy. Okay, so there's a sort of paternalism for one nation Tory, and he thought that the upper class and the working class had some feeling for them, for each other, whereas the bourgeoisie did not, because they were just exploitative. They were cold-heartedly calculating profit and loss. A lot of his bunkum, there was this sort of romantic neo-medievalism, saying that the cottage is unsafe the castle is unsafe if the cottage is unhappy, and that good Tory aristocrats must care for the penurious and try and help them out. Again, that's largely bunkum, because they were just as rack-renting as exploitative as the middling sorts. So he considered Jews to be a very aristocratic race, and he said that he was the missing page between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And he deposed ending legal discrimination towards Jews, the 1858 the Jewish Relief Bill, because yes, he was ethnically Jewish, but by faith a Christian from the age of 12. There'd been some sort of squabble in Bevis Mark synagogue, and it was as a result of that his father said, "That's it, I can't take it anymore. We're leaving Judaism." So what else about them? They'd lived on Bloomsbury Square and various other places. So he got on very well with Queen Victoria, and he's the one who changed the royal titles bill in 1876, making her Empress of India. And you can see a little cartoon about it here, him as this Oriental merchant trying to sell her something, a bit like something out of Aladdin and the Lamp. So he faced some anti-Semitism, and when he was campaigning, sometimes people waved bits of bacon at him as it asked him, "Would you eat this? Are you really a Christian?" Or calling him calling him Shylock. So faced many racial slurs. So yeah, well known as a writer, he failed 4 times to get elected to Parliament. Finally successful. And in the 1850s, despite him having fulminated against Sir Robert Peel for the repeal of the Corn Laws, he then accepted that was actually the right thing to do. So he didn't come back. So the Earl of Derby was his main ally in politics. Made Conservative Prime Minister a few times. Disraeli. He also moved the second reform bill, which allowed a more extensive reform than he'd opposed the Liberals trying just a year earlier. So 1867 extended the vote to more of the middling order, whereas the Liberal Dullamites had opposed even Gladstone's moderate reform bill the year before. So the phrase Tory democracy took off. His most famous stretch as Prime Minister was 1874 to 1880, but there was rising crime in Ireland back then. There was the defeat, some defeats in the Zulu War, eventual victory, but the defeat at Isandlwana. There was tension with Russia. There was the Second Anglo-Afghan War, in which Sir Louis Cavagnari was killed, the ambassador in Kabul, an absolutely outrageous breach of the Vienna Convention, the murder of an ambassador. It wasn't by private individuals, it was by the Afghan government. But there was a punitive expedition, so a teachable moment for the Afghans. The idea was they know that they couldn't get away with this, and British prestige would be restored. What else about Disraeli? So he was very ill in 1880. There was the Midlothian campaign, whereas the British policy was to be an ally of the Ottoman Empire, because the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire was supposedly the Caliph of all Sunni Muslims. About 80% of Mohammedans are Sunnis, and that they would, therefore, the deal was the British would be supportive of the Ottoman Empire, and in return the Ottomans would tell Muslims throughout the globe to support the British Empire. But anyway, there was a rebellion in Bulgaria. The Turkish army, between the Bashi bazooks, they put it down. But they were especially brutal about this, deliberately killing thousands of civilians. And Gladstone, who was the Liberal leader, he had his Midlothian campaign, got elected in the Midlothian by-election, and he really delivered some stellar orations. He vociferated against Conservative policy, saying this is grossly immoral. He published his tract, The Bulgarian Horrors and the Question of the East, saying it was totally unethical for the United Kingdom to be allied to such a barbarously cruel regime as that of the Ottomans, which was almost unexampled in terms of moral turpitude. Anyway, so this excited popular fervour. Gladstone was returned, and Disraeli said, "I refuse to read a line of this round." Gladstone would be going around Midlothian, that's near Edinburgh, delivering these speeches, and these were bravura orations, every single one of them, extemporising. He could hold forth for hours, meaning just dissembling from the Tories in response. So anyway, Gladstone came back. There's the 1880 election, in which Gladstone led the Liberals to victory. So Lord Beaconsfield was very ill. He died in April 1881. Victoria was very fond of him. Somehow they got along very well, even though he wasn't from the patrician background that previous prime ministers had been. And she found Gladstone hard work, saying he dresses me as though this is a public meeting. Anyway, she even offered to see the dying Disraeli, and Disraeli had declined, saying she would only ask me to bring a message to Albert. Her beloved husband, Prince Albert, had died 20 years early at the age of only 42. Anyway, Gladstone refused to attend Disraeli's funeral at Westminster Abbey, claiming to be too busy, because there was a lot of rancour between the two, much more so than you'd expect between leaders of rival political parties who might have some sort of professional respect for each other, might not actually loathe each other, but these two deeply detested each other. So Disraeli's buried in the grounds here, in the church of the grounds here. I might show you that later. So that's just a little bit about Benjamin Disraeli and his house, Hughenden Manor. It was taken over in the Second World War, commandeered to be used by the Royal Air Force. So here we are in Buckinghamshire. Anyway, that's just a little bit about Benjamin Disraeli. Come here. It's very atmospheric, absolutely fascinating. But some of these rooms, as you can see, don't tell you anything about Disraeli's time. Perhaps this room didn't even exist when Benjamin Disraeli was here. So a subsequent owner, he gave it to the Disraeli Society. It was then handed over to the National Trust. And the Earl of Halifax, being chairman at the time, Lord Halifax is the erstwhile Viceroy of India from 1926 to 31, who died in 1959. A Foreign Secretary in the late 30s, an appeaser. Edward Wood was his name, very controversial character for his appeasement. The Holy Fox, as Churchill called him, as in Halifax, Holy Fox, but he liked fox hunting and high Anglicanism. The guy was about 6'4" and born with no right hand. Had a stellar career at Eton, getting all these sent up for goods, as in for absolutely outstanding work. Anyway, and here we can see the kitchen with an Arga, complete with an Arga saga. Various novelists write these about upper middle class life in the home counties. There, behold, yon Arga. Okay, and you only get to see the ground floor, I'm afraid. So perhaps I've given you just a flavour of life in Hughenden. I wonder when that wallpaper design is from. Is that contemporary? So it was not short of a few pennies, Disraeli, and it didn't really work as such. And remember, there were no parliamentary salaries till about 1911. Helped the Labour MPs, most of who came from proletarian backgrounds, and therefore couldn't afford to live without working. One of the Charter's demands, and actually Disraeli, almost uniquely amongst Conservatives, being sympathetic to them, he was part of this group called Young England with other Conservatives. It was very popular to say young and then the country for various nationalist movements around Europe at the time. Young Ireland, Young Italy, Young Poland, perhaps they were Young Germany. But the difference was England was united. It wasn't independent. It's part of the United Kingdom. He always talked about England, saying several of them about the United Kingdom. But perhaps that was a synecdoche for the United Kingdom. And he was not at all keen on Daniel O'Connell. And indeed, it has really made some disobliging remarks about us, the Irish. So anyway, given you just a brief overview of Disraeli's house. So it's open to the public as a National Trust property these days. I don't know who this 18th century gentleman is. So Disraeli had a beard, as we know, and I can't think which Prime Minister, if any, had a beard before him. So his favourite flower was the primrose, and that's why the Primrose League existed for decades afterwards, a conservative organisation, but it emerged into some other conservative body sometime afterwards. Okay, so that is enough about Disraeli's house here at Hughenden Manor in Buckinghamshire. So in this deep England context, he could play the squire. So he was MP for Buckinghamshire for a while, one of the most ardently conservative areas of the United Kingdom. I remember in the sort of 1995 local elections, about the only county to return a Conservative majority in the entire realm. So that is the main entrance of Hughenden Manor. So three-storey pile, and there's a stable block beyond. Okay, that's enough from here, so I hope you enjoyed what you saw, a bit of Tory history. So please follow me on Instagram, on Twitter and Facebook. And to donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. I really need donations to keep the channel going. Goodbye.